even though we're just kind of getting started, because I don't want to forget.
No worries.
Because we record these calls and put them in a folder, and all of our students in the art department are watching the calls and responding to them in their sketchbooks.
Nice.
So sometimes they're taking notes. Sometimes they're just drawing what they see, or they're drawing like what visual comes to their mind with the topic. Um, Sometimes it's a combination of both, but it's a way
Awesome.
of like processing what they're learning through all of these conversations. So it's really good to have you, Latoya Snell, and I just want to introduce you as a Brooklyn ultra marathoner, um, media influencer, Instagram star, professional chef, artist, and aspiring triathlete.
Yes.
So you have some amazing stories to tell. And I think that we have a lot to learn from you about perseverance and resiliency. And I continue to be inspired by your story and appreciate your vulnerability in sharing it so openly. So, welcome to Lebanon High School via Zoom.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, and hopefully, I will not bore you guys.
Never.
So, yeah, just let me know. Like, is it whenever it's good to actually jump in and start, or should we wait for a couple more people to
I
kind
think
of
we're
load in?
good. We usually just have a handful of students, but like I say, the for the next few weeks, the kids will be playing those, and it'll be part of their required coursework for the semester. So this you are
Oh,
part of the Globally Strong Culture Fair. So it's good
awesome.
to connect into New York City today.
Awesome. 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 Wow. Okay. So trying to figure out where we should actually jump into. I'll give a little bit of background about who I am, some of the boring and not so boring stuff that I've been doing. Well, my name is Latoya Shante Snell. I'm the food and fitness blogger of Running Fat Chef, and it's basically my blog that I created in 2016, where I talk about some of my food influences that comes from 10 plus years of being in the culinary industry, as well as combining my current career as a sponsored athlete for companies like Hoka One One, which some people pronounce it as Hoka One One. It may not be as known as like a Nike or a Reebok, but it is a tremendous new company that's been around for about 10 or 11 years. And I'm so happy to actually be able to represent them. Yes, it'll be those sneakers right there. And right along with, I'm a sponsored athlete for a company, a small not for profit company called Machines for Freedom, which basically they create. Outfits, or they make triathlete outfits, as well as mostly running cycling outfits for athletes of different sizes that go up to like 3x. And I've been fortunate enough to be featured, have my story featured on platforms like Good Morning America, Today Show. um I've been able to talk with some other influencers, as well as other professionals who are in the sport. And this was something that was completely not prepared for. But the beautiful part is, and I'm pretty sure you guys have learned this, and now with being in your courses, is that you can sign up for one thing, and your possibilities are endless, where you're not just limited to looking into one thing. One part of my, well, I won't say one part, I would say an essential part of being an artist myself, is that I'm able to actually go from medium to medium to medium. Um, and I'm pretty sure, like, that I will never assume. So I will just, let's say like this. Anyone who may not be aware of when I say the word medium, it's more like you can go from one type of art platform or space and be able to utilize it in another way. So in so many ways, my online platform is like a mixed media canvas, if you want to look at it in that way. Only thing is, we're doing it through an electronic format, where I'm able to take videos, I'm able to take images, I'm able to take the art that I collect through my journal, my traveling, or right now, as we are pretty much at home, or we're kind of contained to like a limited amount of space, and I'm able to create art and share that with my platform. And I definitely agree, my life is definitely a moving art form, and so is yours. What I'm grateful about this era, you guys are in a beautiful era where, even like, I mean, I would not consider myself, that old, honestly. I mean, you're as old as you feel. But, when I think back to growing up in the 80s and 90s, art was celebrated and so were previous generations, but at times it was a questionable career. It was just like, are you sure that's the thing that you want to do? Because it's not guaranteed success. And now we look at your era, being here in the 21st century, where we're able to look at your era and say, yes, life is definitely art. It is something to aspire to do, and it is something that is actually necessary. At least in my opinion, I believe it is heavily necessary now more than ever, as we are going through, unfortunately, these series of pandemics. Over the course of a year, we've gone through, as a collective globally, we've gone through COVID-19, and a lot of people have lost a lot of inspiration to do the things that they love, because it doesn't feel the same. We're not approaching things the same way. Every day that we wake up, we are essentially touching a different subject, a different matter, whether we're speaking about COVID-19 itself, or we're talking about some of the racial tensions that's going on, or the xenophobia that we may have noticed. Xenophobia, as in referring to some of, like, a little bit of the racially based hate crimes that's been happening, or a cultural hate crime that's been happening within our communities. And these are really complex conversations to navigate through, to feel like just for being you in your own skin means that you may not be embraced or accepted, or sometimes even understood. And that's what I like to be able to talk about on my platform, through my social media platforms, through my sports, through my food, my health and wellness, because I believe that art is everywhere. And art is actually a healing source, if you ask me. We have that documented over time. If you look at music, music was a healer over time. When we think about the 60s and 70s, and when we think about, I see one of the names on here, jazz. If we actually take jazz, jazz is a huge genre. And we think about the power of jazz. Your name is power. So when we think about the art form jazz, and how it created R&B, how it created, how you're able to derive things like, rock and roll, all these things that we don't think of that comes from this genre. It actually does. So I hope you know that your name is power. No pressure, but that when we think about how things have changed over the last year, how we were able to connect up close, and now we're connecting by far. This is still a form of art, even in its distressed state. We know that from doing art, that even in these powerful moments, we are actually living out a significant part of history. And during these times, I know it's probably something that's cliche that what a lot of us heard on the internet, that this is the time to be artistic and creative. And this feels like one of those things that's kind of like beat into our heads. I know, particularly as an adult, I feel overwhelmed by hearing that over and over again, because we are allowed to sit in our feelings. We are allowed to say, hey, listen, today is just not the day that I feel like being a creative. Maybe part of your art is resting. Maybe part of your art is actually allowing the artist to just think and take the time to grow, to be able to revisit something and say, well, you know what? Right now is the time I want to pick up the pen. Maybe right now is the time that I want to take on music. Maybe right now is the time that I want to create. And that's what I look at with my platform, with my fitness, with my activist work, and all of the things that I essentially associate myself with. Now, the topic today is pretty much on perseverance. And I think that globally, we are all persevering the best way that we possibly can. Um, there's really no right or wrong way to actually go about it, honestly. I think that it is a raw canvas when we think about it. That right now, this is something completely new to all of us, and some of us are persevering by trying different things, experimenting with different things. I've been experimenting with my voice a lot more these days than I ever have in the last, I wouldn't honestly say ever. Um, Being in the public eye, it's not always easy. And when you are sitting in a leadership role, it is oftentimes the word intimidating. It's something that people sometimes we speak about it, we kind of dance around it, but we don't really address it. Being in a leadership role sometimes is this pressure, this pseudo pressure that exists on you to always know what to say, what to do, how to respond. And I think that true leadership comes from the idea of being able to admit that sometimes we don't always have the answers. Sometimes the plans will fail, that sometimes we are abstract in ourselves and how we present ourselves to the world. So when we think of the word perseverance, when I think of that word, I don't only associate it with strength, I also associate it with vulnerability. To be able to give myself permission to freely articulate myself, to paint the world with the brush that I desire, to be able to look at the world and say, this is what is being presented to me, and here's the possibilities that I'm able to take with this raw canvas and make it into something tremendous. Maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe the entire board, maybe I visualized something as bright and vibrant. And now this turns into something that looks kind of dull. There's still art there. It's just a matter of how do we revisit that canvas? Maybe it's not at that moment. Maybe we let the canvas dry up. Then we apply other things on there. Maybe it is a mixed medium. Maybe we apply other layers to it to say, this started off as this type of project. Now that I'm here, I'm seeing something else completely different. And as we layer on these things, it turns into something completely beautiful, but unscripted, unplanned. That is our life. Our life is nothing but moving and evolving art. We are growing minute to minute in everything that we do. When I think back to being your age and where I thought I would be, I thought that I would probably be a lawyer or a doctor, something very, very serious that I am not. And uh, I did not visualize myself being or identifying as an artist. I definitely did not visualize myself in sports. My form of sports was just kind of watching other kids kind of knock each other out. That was my form of sports and my love for boxing. You could have never told me that I would ever be an ultra runner. Now, the word ultra runner, because I know that I say that word and I throw it around often, and people are just like, okay, what exactly is an ultra runner? An ultra runner is, think of a marathoner. So a marathon is 26.2 miles. Or for anyone, because I'd never assume, for anyone that may be familiar with kilometers, that would be equivalent to 42.2 kilometers. So imagine if you visualize your neighborhood and imagine that you are only walking, and the average person walks around 18 to 20-minute pace. Imagine multiplying that by 26.2. You're out there for a really long time. Now, if you're running it, it's going to pick up a little bit faster. Maybe for some people, maybe the approach is to go slower, and that's completely fine. The marathon distance doesn't change. But what makes it an ultra marathon is once you hit that 26.3 and higher in distance. And that's pretty much what I do. So my longest distance to date was 100K, 100 kilometers, which is equivalent to roughly 62.3 miles. And it really means that I'm out there for a really long time.
Where was,
Um,
oh God, where was this?
The ultra marathon that I did was it was called the Javelina 100, and it basically was in Fountain Hills, Arizona. So it's complete contrast. It's definitely a difference from where I'm accustomed to being. I'm a New York City girl. I'm used to the urban environment. I'm used to large buildings, lots of pollution, noisy areas, not that much nature around me aside from like, casual birds and stuff. The desert, on the other hand, is completely a completely different territory for me. So you're talking about a lot of open space, a lot of animals and bugs that I am not friendly with, like rattlesnakes. We're talking about large spiders. This animal called a javelina is a very real thing. Javelina is like a pig. It's like a wild pig out in the outdoors. And they usually they won't engage you unless it's the if mama is there with babies, she is probably going to attack you, and she's going to go head on, and you just need to run. So it's like these are the things I had to worry about out there. And of course the environment was completely different aside from the dirt and the hills that sometimes you encounter. I also had to be aware of cacti out there. So that was a huge element to being out there at that race. And what made it significant, it was not something I was familiar with. It was not a place that I would consider as home, but it was beautiful. Being in Fountain Hills, Arizona, the unique qualities that I saw out there was I love the sunrise and sunset. If you want to see the different layers of the sky, just look at the sunrise and sunset. It was the one thing that kept me going for 28 hours and 27 minutes. Very brutal, very, very brutal. I would not lie to you and say, oh yeah, it was easy. For some people, particularly really, really fast people, they're able to finish this in tremendous hours. They can finish this in 7 to 8 hours. Some people on average will finish this around the 24, 25 hour mark. I was literally the last participant. I watched people quit this course. I watched people say a lot of f words out there in that course, some not friendly things. I saw people, that literally were just not able to physically able to push through this feat. And the thing that kept me going was a combination of the reasons why. I reminded myself to go out there. It is the art of perseverance. It was not just about the training that I put in on my feet. It was about what I felt in my heart of why I showed up. I think that is something that oftentimes gets looked over in sports, because any of us can actually go out there and perform and do something if we truly desire it. But to stay in it when it actually gets hard, almost like pretty much what we're experiencing right now, it is like a never ending marathon that we're going through. We just want things to go back to the same, and we're just pushing through this ultra marathon that we have going on right now. So for me, what kept me going is knowing that there is a finish line out there. And there's what different ways of going about this finish line. Now I can be carried off and somebody can end my journey, or I can choose when I decide that I want to end this journey so I can pick up another one. And I elected to do the latter. It takes time. It may mean that you reevaluate things. It means that you revisit it and you say, let's go back to the drawing board and let's see what works. And then there's other times where I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to stay the course. There are no shortcuts in it. Sometimes we think that there's a shortcut in it, and the reality of it is that we may be creating a longer path for ourselves. So, what I truly adore and I love about doing that race and doing ultra marathons in general is that I am constantly challenging myself. And just my presence alone, I'm not oblivious of what I represent to my community. I happen to identify as a plus size person. I do represent, communities that people would consider as marginalized. as a Black girl from Brooklyn, New York, or as we identify our native land, the Lenape land. That's where I'm at. The Lenape would be in New York until I think about closer to the Connecticut area where it shifts off. Um, as a person that acknowledged that that's where I am, I realized that it is not a regular thing to see someone, a Black person that happens to be plus size, to take on endurance activities. My representation alone is living art. To be able to have the opportunities that's been afforded to me, I work really hard to make sure that I'm opening up the ways for people like you, for people who do not look like me, as well as people who look like me. So you, whatever you decide to put in, sometimes we get it back, and sometimes it also means that we could put in the work and we feel like it's not moving fast enough, that it's not catching up with the things that we desired for it to, the speed that we wanted to pick up. But I encourage you to persevere, to stay the course, to reevaluate over and over again. Let's say that something is not working out. That's cool. Let's revisit it and say, this is what's not working out. Let's trade it off for something else. Don't be afraid to experiment. It's almost as similar as the way that we treat our art. Sometimes we have this plan that this is the way that something is going to work. And then we realize one stroke completely changes the course of what your plans were. It may produce something beautiful. It may produce something that you don't desire, but there is always a finish line that's there. And it's up to you as the artist to be able to identify that, just as I do as an athlete, as a creative, and as a person who speaks up openly and in this space. Don't be afraid to fall and surrender to being vulnerable. Vulnerability is a strength. So, I sort of, as a comment on here, I hear you saying perseverance is the hard work of living an authentic whole life. I absolutely agree. Um, I think that, sometimes we say to people, oftentimes we say to people, to live in your own truth, but we don't know exactly what does that mean. Because our own personal truth can be scary. People tell us to be honest, and then we feel like we're being reprimanded for being honest. Well, I will tell people to challenge that as many times as you can, whether that means you're challenging that within yourself or you're challenging the people around you. And when I say the word challenge, I don't mean like go and, fight to the death and suit up and put on the armor and, and go fight them or anything like that. It means to constantly question, why is something working? Why is something not resonating? Maybe it's the tone of how you're trying to get something out there. Maybe it's because you're talking to the wrong people. Maybe you haven't identified your audience yet. Because we all have an audience. You don't require to have 100,000 people following you. You don't even need 5,000. Maybe the person that you need to follow you first is yourself. Because sometimes we give out advice to people and then we look back at our reflections like, do I really believe that? Do I wholeheartedly believe that? Like, I've learned it, but is it really registering? It's like almost like sitting in the class, and eventually after 5 minutes it sounds like the teacher's going wah 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 wah. And it's just like, okay, why am I here? Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's just like, okay, can this class be over? That's nice, teach, but you got something else I'm interested in? So like when you start to hear those moments start to kick in, there's something that either maybe it's a tone issue, maybe it doesn't resonate with you because it hasn't been brought down to a level where they actually see your experience. And that's where the beauty is that you get to always present who you are authentically to the table every single day. So if there's something that maybe your teacher or your mentor isn't giving to you and you're interested in the subject, or you're trying to gain interest in the subject, that is for you as the artist to say, hey, listen, that's great, but I really don't understand that. And that's your personal truth speaking, saying, hey, how can we make each other great? How can we make each other better? Because the teacher is only as powerful as a student at times. We can have these tools in our head and say, you know, Here I am. I learned all these things in school. That's great. But if you're not responsive to it, if you don't understand it, then what exactly am I teaching you? What exactly am I getting across to you? If I'm in here saying, "Hey, I'm going to turn on country music," and everybody's like, what? Um, we don't listen to that. I don't care what kind of message you have across. That's just not my interest. It's going to be very hard to teach you versus we find some type of middle ground. Maybe I don't like rap, but I like country music. Maybe our middle ground is just listening to the lyrics. We listen to the words that's being put in there. It's like, oh wow, just like rap, there's storytelling in country music. And then we find our middle ground, and now we're both able to teach each other. Don't ever, ever, ever think that you are not in a position of leadership as a student. You are always, both sides are always sitting at a level of leadership where both sides can be both the educator and the student. And sometimes it doesn't feel that way because we feel like, oh, well, I'm this age and this person is standing here and they look really serious. They're staring and they're like, nope, you got to sit like this. You got to stay up like this. No, you don't have to be rigid. Instead, you can teach people without them even knowing it. That's what I love to do on my platform. On my platform, I like to call myself auntie. As we like to throw around, I like to call myself auntie or friend because I love for people to feel like they're sitting in my living room. And when you come to someone's house, you want to feel welcome, loved, and embraced. When I am able to do that with my community, with the people that I have sitting in front of me, I know that I'm earning them, that I'm trusting them, and they in turn are trusting me to be able to provide something. So we're all able to get something from each other. This is the art of persevering. But persevering does not have to be as rigid or as stiff or one dimensional that sometimes the word sometimes inherits. Maybe is inherited from our family members or friends, or maybe the environments and the things that we're watching on TV. Perseverance is a daily act. It is sometimes it's a very cleansing act to be able to persevere through the moment. And I see that happening just basically existing on this platform, and I'm able to thrive through these online platforms and I like taking that stuff into the public space. But before I rambled on, was there anything else that you would like me to actually touch on?
Eric is our resident journalist. He's a photojournalism teacher.
Love
So
it.
he's
Yes.
Yes, yeah. I mean, your ability to communicate is contagious, and I think there could be a lot said about your technical expertise. What kind of training do you have, or what do you recommend?
You mean as in the art space or
Yeah.
like in the speaking in general?
Well, just I think your ability to use the modern technology, and I don't know if that's just something that our generation has just absorbed or something you've studied.
Both. Actually, it was a mixture of both. So, when I got into photography, really interesting. When I got into photography, it was one of those things where I was just like, well, everybody's performing around me. Why don't I take pictures? And when I say performing, I was interested in open mics after I left high school. One of my friends brought me there, and it was during the era of Def Poetry Jam.
Yeah.
Everybody was doing slam poetry.
Mhm.
And I was just like, wow, they sound amazing, but the words wasn't the only thing that hit me. It was the way that they expressed themselves, the way that they took their time to articulate themselves. Because we can say the fox is in the room and it means nothing, but if we take our time and we use that emotion, that raw emotion in us, and then to do the timing, almost like with comedy, the fox entered the room. Now we added drama, we added layers, and when you add on the expression of what was coming from that person, I was just like, wow, how can I tell a story without any words? And that's what I find that's powerful when it comes down to the art space. That's what we're doing. We're essentially trying to tell stories with whatever medium that we have presented in front of us. So when I think about photography, I think to myself, how can I get across to my viewers once I decide that I'm going to, you know, I'm going to let go of the art and I'm going to give it to the community. What do I want them to see? And then what things do they see after I released it? One of my favorite instructors came from LaGuardia Community College. It was, I want to say 2011, 2012. His name is Javier Lorenes, and he looked at me and he's just like, you're so technical at times, but he's like, the way that you speak, you're super colorful. How can we get that into your artwork? And I was just like, I'm telling him all the things that I wanted to do. I could actually pull it down. Let's see, I'll pull it off my wall. So I created this thing called, it was a dolls project. I wanted to turn everyday people into my living dolls, essentially.
Wow.
And he's like, whoa, that's going to be a hard one to kind of do on film. It was my first class, my first semester. And he's like, that's a pretty ambitious. And he's like, what made this come to mind? And I was like, oh, I've seen a couple of movies, and it was like probably like 1920s, 1930s inspired movies. Right along with thinking about a R.L. Stein book
Mhm.
about Nightmare of the Living Dummy.
Wow.
And I remember how much looking at dolls actually either made me feel joyful or they actually scared me because they felt hollow. And I was just like, how can I get a bit of a mixture of all of that? How can I turn everyday people into my living dolls and get them to see that from my perspective? And I realized if you took out the life, almost like if you took away certain light directions, it almost removed the lights from the eyes. So
Wow.
now when nothing
Interesting.
bounces back, it's almost like looking at an empty shell. And just like a doll, you can prop them up a certain way. I recognize through open mics when I see them, the reason why the audience pretty much love them is because of the way they convey their words, the way that they were able to exaggerate their movements at times. And you do the same thing really when we think about photography, when we think about utilizing the online space as a medium, when you think about TikTok challenges. I mean, where all of these things are a mixture of using mixed medium. We're talking about incorporating music, or maybe it's the original sound from your voice, but it's the way that you say it. To be able to sell people on what you want them to see, whether it's humor, whether it's informative, we want to be able to educate people through these mediums. So what I do now is I take my artistic background of my photography work, because most of the stuff that I interacted with was food. Food didn't talk back to me. The only way it talked back to me is that we have this thing what we call it as we have a shelf life. When you put a product in front of you and then it starts to lose certain glare, or if you're working with something like ice cream, it's timely because that ice cream starts to melt the moment that it comes out that freezer, and it's like, here comes our life when it's formed into a ball, and here comes the death when everything is melted, and now this is not a product worthy shot. So I took that background, took the background I have with being a journalist, of being able to write and articulate and express myself, and I used that on this new platform, pretty much through my social media platforms, which is like completely foreign to me because I had no training in that. And I'm just like, how can I actually get a double whammy of getting people to do things beyond just looking at the pretty picture? I
Sure.
know how to photograph things. I know how to hire people to photograph the things that I want. But how do I get them to actually read or actually find interest in what I do it and in the ways that I do it? So I took parts of my own personality and I incorporated in there. I think that when I see social media, um people tend to look at others and they emulate it. There's nothing wrong with emulation as long as you can actually identify what makes it unique. And that unique layer is always going to be you. So self discovery, I think, is probably the strongest tool that even our educators can't teach us in. We have to teach ourselves. And the more that we know ourselves, is the stronger that we can appeal to the audiences that we desire to attract. And if it, I beg of people to not limit themselves, to think that, oh, I mastered this so I don't have to learn anything else. No, there is, art is an evolving process, and so are you. So I encourage people to just do the same.
Definitely. I love that image you showed us, and it shows that technical expertise of kind of that shallow depth of field, as if you were looking down upon something almost like a landscape or from a distance, but the bokeh effect really creates that sense that you're looking at a doll.
Right.
There's this really cool effect. There was also something you mentioned about the poetry, and recently watching the inauguration with Amanda Gorman as the
Mm.
speaker. I would be curious about your inspiration on that in a modern society.
I think is there are so many elements when I think about Amanda Gorman's her performance in that day. For one, I'm before she ever opened her mouth, I realized how powerful she was. And that's because we are judging people. We look at colors. We look at we take in our personal feelings, and that's the power of imagery, is that we're sometimes looking to identify ourselves. And for me, I was able to identify myself very quickly. I was like, wow. She went on the stage and her hair texture, her bold colors, that just really just it made me instantly think of power but happiness. That was before she ever opened her mouth. And I mean, and I got that from someone who was what, probably about 10, 15 years younger than me. And I'm just like, wow, look at that power that she commands on the stage without ever saying a word. Then she, you know, very confidently articulated herself on that stage. And the timing right now, at a time where a lot of people felt disconnected to the government, that could not see themselves or felt like they saw themselves, but they were being reduced. I think that we needed something that powerful at that time. So, taking consideration timing, the choice of words, the way that you uplift people through words and timing, and to be that poised in front of a large platform, regardless of how many things have changed, it is still a large platform, because I think sometimes it's much more intimidating to talk to a screen. When you know that camera is on, it's like, oh, okay, no pressure. Um, only like 10 million people looking at me. So if I fart on this stage and everybody will know it, it's just like it when you have those elements and you remind yourself that everything starts with a breath. It's a beautiful experience to really take in and engulf. And I cannot say enough about wanting to see where else that she takes this to. um as a Black woman, I'm incredibly proud. A lot of Black, brown, and indigenous people just don't think of themselves when they think of leadership. We think about love, about being in those type of platforms. We sometimes don't see ourselves enough, or if we do see it, then we see it in a comedic sense. To see it in such a refreshing sense, where you're still able to take in the things I mean, the colors like that, if we think about that in history, colors like that, wearing that on a main stage like that, would have been crucified. I can't help but think back to the Obama era, where wearing a gray, not a gray suit, wearing a brown suit was considered controversial. So when I look at that inauguration that day, and I saw all the vibrant colors, and not just from her, but from everybody else that was in the room, it says that we are progressing, that we are persevering, we are willing to actually change the narrative, and we're doing that daily. So when you change that narrative, there's hope.
Awesome, definitely. And I showed that poem to every student I have, and it was, I think, a moment of unity and perseverance through some of the struggles we've had, and to see maybe somebody lifting up the possibility, and really excited me. Your artwork made me think of a recent movie. I think it's Mar When Call, or it's a movie that talks about how capturing these action figures to tell a painful story in World War II. Do you remember
Yes,
that?
I think I do know this one. Oh my gosh. Why is it not clicking? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think I feel like I feel like
I
I've
may
seen this.
trying to think of who was the main actors in that, but it was um, from from I guess the from The Office. Jeff. Trying to think, where was it? Oh, Tom Putman, I think, was one of the main actors or the
Hmm.
directors. I'm trying to think. Anyway, I was just thinking of your artwork, and as it reminded me of a recent movie that I saw. So I apologize. I don't have the full answer though.
Where's
I'm Latoya, do you have like, can you pull Instagram up and we could like let you share
Yes.
screens? I think it would be interesting if you like just showed a couple of your Instagram stories because I want them to be able to see. I mean, just a lot of times she's just cooking a meal and
Yeah,
there's and it's
definitely.
just the way it progresses through the steps in the process,
Oh
the
yeah.
way it's like set to music. It's beautiful. It's actually pretty relaxing to watch, even if you're not interested in trying to cook.
Yeah.
It's, and
Let's
she
see.
does the same thing with her workouts. And there's always a story to be told through her Instagram, and I've enjoyed following it a lot.
Yes, so I do have that. I'm gonna make sure that there's things that's appropriate. Because I think yesterday I was in my bra, so I don't want to kind of like scare anybody with that. Let's see. Okay, so let's go to yeah, I can pause it from
Yeah,
here.
that'd be
And I should
high
have the
school appropriate.
and I should have an option to share screen. Yes. Okay, I see it here at the bottom, and I'm gonna choose my second one. Okay, and is everybody able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so pretty much, well, this is actually comes from one of my followers. They kind of celebrated me for Black Women's History Week, and the thing is, like when I say that I get people's attention with imagery. So I had my husband, who's also a photographer. He took this image, and the statement on here, very bold statement on here is actually a shirt that I sell, and it does have a little bit of vulgarity in it, but the reason why my husband, I asked him to just really just kind of compose me in a certain way, and he had me basically blocked off, like art from an artistic standpoint. He had me centered, which sometimes it can work for people and sometimes it doesn't. So composition wise, I wanted him to be able to make it almost manipulate the eye to make people have to look where I want them to. Because sometimes, especially when you have a lot of things around you, that's where it's great to have that bokeh or to have that line of symmetry. So for this, I use the image that he took of me, and then the caption that went to the actual post was to speak about humanity, because I believe, and that actually ties with the perseverance layer, where I feel like a lot of us are talking about being activists and being allies in this space, but somewhere along the way we're starting to lose a little bit of humanity and grace for people, to remember that we are all learning, we are all capable of making mistakes, we are all trying to progress as we go, and we all don't have the answers to everything, and that comes with the learning process. So this is another one of the stories that actually came in here. I think somebody's actually trying to get into the room. There we go. And the person kind of featured me a little bit again. And this is my son right here, who's 13. He asked to kind of go in and take a picture with me. He kept shaking the camera. So, but and that will be Samuel L. Jackson. So I tend to have what I recognize through these platforms is that sometimes I find it helpful to kind of caption, because it allows me to have access to another community that may be hard of hearing, that may want to actually see subtitles. So typically I have subtitles of
Mm.
anything that's speaking in the background, because sometimes when we think about if you go back to the era of silent films, there was no words. So, you were able to get it from those moving images. And then there would be a little caption there if it was something that needed to be said. And now, as we've progressed in that era, sometimes I feel like we've almost taken away a community because those captions are not always available. So now the person's resorted to reading lips or this was I was able to not only take on the storytelling aspect, but I was able to show people through visuals. And that's what I mean by mixed media. So I can show you visually, like let's say that one part of my audience, because I know my audience. One part of my audience is just there for the visual. They're like, hey, that's cute. That's nice that you're talking about this, but I really don't care. I care about your makeup. So so I'm able to talk with them on that, but I'm able to utilize these visuals where maybe once in a blue, maybe I have 1,500 to 2,000 people who are interested in this. And they say, I originally came here for this, but I decided today was the day I was going to read the captions. And now I not only learn in a different community, but me authentically telling my story, I'm able to get people to see and hear a different perspective that maybe I wouldn't have them before. They realize that my art is not just one dimensional. So what I did was I just pretty much went along with my story. I usually take people through my workouts and then I invite them to my actual playlist. So I use different mediums. I love using music. I love using visuals. I love using different ways to kind of get the community engaged. This is one of the photos that he actually took. But before it, I took people through my culinary stories. So last night I decided I was going to make fried chicken and cornbread because people are like, do you actually make anything simple? And I'm like, yes, actually I do have nights where I do make things simple. Unfortunately the camera is in reverse because it's on selfie mode. But it is always amazing of what kind of feedback that I get. I've had so many people that actually told me without even knowing it, you've taught me how to season food. You've taught me how to properly cut things to gain some type of kitchen confidence. So whenever you're doing content creation, what you want to keep in mind is that you always have the ability to teach somebody or to actually show your experience from a different perspective. Now, like I said, I don't know if the sound is actually picking up on there, but if it's not, um, there's music actually playing in the background. So because I like to almost create a theme without words, instead of them just kind of looking like, oh, okay, I'm just looking at a whole bunch of food getting seasoned. I like to get people to listen to the sounds that's in my background.
I think,
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry. I think it's muted. I think like you can click.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Sorry.
I was like, what's going on here? Yeah, so like I'll keep it muted just because I'm still talking over it. But like, yeah, like so in the background is like music kind of like going on there. And what I do every day is I usually have music in the background so it stimulates people where they're not just looking at dead air. They're not bored. And at times I'm now able to get people to see where my mind is at, what I'm thinking. Um, I tend to make playlists or according to feeling. So if I want to play Nina Simone in the background, then they have an idea of where my mind is at. Or if I want to play Cardi B in the background, they're like, oh, okay, we really know where her mind is at. You when you're doing content creation, or content curation, in this instance, you want to ask yourself, how do you separate yourself from everyone else? And it can really just be by your personality. And this is completely me. This is kind of like I love the culinary environment, but I also am very multidimensional, and I like to be able to teach people what I'm doing step by step. So I take my time and I literally plan out how I'm going to do it. Now, what people don't see is that this is all storyboarded for me.
Wow.
Now, this was all 15, 16 hours ago. So for me to be able, especially since my platform is growing, um, I realized that I didn't want someone else kind of taking over and making my story for me. Like people sometimes what we see online, we don't realize somebody's being hired for this. I do all my work on my own. This is not to say that the way that somebody else does it is wrong. But for me, I want to be able to tell my authentic story without feeling like, great, I just hired someone to tell this fraudulent, part of myself. But I also want to maintain that balance of being able to to have an actual life outside of social media, to be able to create boundaries. That's something that's really necessary. And I think as we're growing into understanding the social media era, we realize that it gives you the opportunity to overshare. Oversharing is not a bad thing, but it also can be a bad thing if you don't understand your own personal boundaries. So what I've done through these stories right here is basically my fitness stories. Um, I'm talking about some really hard subjects on here, particularly last night. To be very transparent, my sister is currently in ICU
Mm.
at this moment, and my sister, my son, and I all have in common is that we all have invisible disabilities. And these are topics that, as an activist, I'm very passionate about talking about, particularly in the fitness space, because sometimes we do not see people who look like us accurately represented. So the way that I get across to people is that, yes, you came here for the fitness, but how can I get this social commentary across? And what I do is I realize if you put it down too many words, too much, you're going to lose people. But if you say just enough and you pair it up with imagery, you're able to storyboard the thoughts that you want to get across. So it's about being deliberate. It's about being able to gain interest of the community that you have while not doing something that feels like it's like you're just trying to like pitch people every 5 minutes, because people don't want to be marketed to every 5 minutes. People want to know that you actually care, that you actually listen. And that's what I try to accomplish with my stories. I'll kind of stop the share screen, I guess, from here.
I
Uh,
really appreciate your willingness to share struggles, to share challenges, and I think I personally am drawn to that sense that it's real. It's not something that's just marketing. It's something that everybody can relate to.
right. Right. Thank you. And I heavily appreciate that. One of the things that I knew in this space, because I'll admit, when people started identifying me as an influencer in this space, I cringed. I was like, no, I'm not an influencer. Don't call me an influencer. And they was like, but technically, what you're doing, like, like you work for companies and you're wearing these products. And I'm like, how can I do this as a storytelling aspect? Otherwise, I want no parts of it. There's a lot of marketing, and there's a lot of money that's thrown into this space. Like, I mean, if you're in it for the money, who am I to judge you? But if you're conflicted like I am at times, oftentimes I get a lot of companies that will throw money my way, and they're like, hey, how much money can I get you to give you so you can advertise this product? And I'm like, I don't know anything about your product. I've never heard of you. I don't think that you're reputable. And what exactly are you doing for the communities that I'm going to market this product to? So it is up to you as the artist to do your due diligence, to look into the companies that you pair yourself up with, the same way that you would pair yourself up with certain companies. Not companies, but people. Would you really stand next to this person if they committed a crime? Would you stand next to this person if they did something wrong? Would you call out this company if they did something wrong? Would you be able to empower them or teach them something, or give them tips and tricks of, hey, here's what I see that can work, but here's how we can improve and make some type of progress? These are the things that I take in consideration when I put certain things on my feed. I want it to be an accurate representation of myself. And what I am is not limited. And I don't think that anyone out there is one dimensional. Whatever you put out there, feel comfortable with it, feel confident in it. And even if you do feel a little nervous and it takes you a little bit out of element, experiment with it. See where it's going to take you down the long run. And you say, hey, you know what? I tried this out. This is not really for me. Let's try something different. And through that, what I found over the last, I want to say, 7-8 years of doing this, is that my balance really is being able to take food, fitness, culture, and current events, and be able to accurately, weave that into my feed. And at any time that, there's been a couple of times where I've been wrong and my opinion has changed. Whenever someone, I won't say call out, because I think there's a lot of call out culture. Whenever someone calls you in to say, hey, You might be putting out the wrong information, or can I get you to open up to see something different? There's nothing wrong. I think the most powerful thing to do is to one, to admit I don't know. Two, maybe it was a poor choice in judgment. And three, how can I learn from this? It's not so much of an apology to only to the other person, but it's an apology to self to say I am human, that I am much bigger than this moment. As artists, we are going to experiment. As people, we are going to evolve. And the only way that we're able to do that is to be able to constantly reassess where we came from, where we're going, in order to be able to lead in the future.
Very good. I know we're running into our hour of time, but any upcoming projects or goals you have that we'd like to share?
Oh my gosh. So right now, I'm about a couple of months into my new business. Well, pretty much I took my blog and I turned it into a business, and it's called Running Fat Chef LLC. So I'm officially a business. It's my pretty much I had another artist actually design parts of my face and turn it into a logo. I learned how to take my art, because I considered myself a artsy fartsy person. I was like, I don't want no parts of business. And then I realized, like, you are doing this, for who knows how long. I hope that I'm able to do this work for the rest of my life. I truly love what I do. And sometimes I get so engulfed that I get super passionate, and I'm like, all right, take a step back, but right now, this is my new business venture, and the goal is that I'm hoping in a 3 to 5 year span that I'll be able to actually do a not-for-profit where I'm able to actually on a regular basis be able to give back. And I want to infuse all of the things that I do on my feed to be able to talk about food. So I want to be able to talk about food deserts, food education, fitness access, sports access, and about the disadvantages, to kind of bridge the gap in some of these areas. Right along, we're talking about current events to give people space to be able to articulate how they're feeling. And this when I think about art, art saved my life. When I think about my therapy, like sessions that I've literally had, we actually incorporate, like, there's things called art therapy, and they help me be able to not only be a stronger leader, but to be a stronger individual for myself, for my loved ones, and to be able to revisit things and say, how can I improve for my own personal well-being? So you can't give anything to anyone else if you don't have anything to preserve for yourself.
Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
you're training for a triathlon, like
Yes.
that that's the
Oh
latest thing you're
yeah. Yes,
following. So
yes, yes, yes. I'm
no,
definitely trying.
I'm cheering for you from over here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I can't wait till the world opens up a little bit, because like it's it's kind of hard. Like, I won't lie. Like, this is definitely a different kind of hurdle that we're crossing as athletes. We're not accustomed to not really traveling, and make it harder is that sports is a very intimate sport. It is a solo act, or it can be a group effort. But in our space as athletes, we're used to being able to connect with people and being close and intimate. And really, what COVID-19 is essentially telling us that, hey, you got to be apart. So it's a interruption to things that we already had this order to. And I think that
Thought that
now,
the documentary started before COVID,
right.
and then everything is interrupted. And I hope you've been able to get access to the vaccine.
Yeah,
We're waiting for that to help start to normalize things.
yeah, that's definitely done. Like my mom-in-law, unfortunately, she has it. My mom is. I'm trying to talk my mom into it, because a lot of people do have their reservations.
Yeah.
But I am telling myself that I am going to schedule myself so I can have one. And when my son is old enough, he will have one as well. Everybody's decision on it is, completely different, and I respect it. But
Sure.
for me, I truly just want to see us pick up some type of normal, because it's not going to look the same.
Mhm.
It's
That's
it,
true.
we're gonna be like, very honest about it, especially, speaking from an environmental standpoint. It's not going to look the same, just like it didn't look the same when we think about historical periods like 1980s, no, 1918, with the flu. So when it came down to influenza and it was a new thing, and it's just like, oh, what do we do? We're in a larger is more people, different access of technology, and sometimes fraudulent information or accurate information kind of scares people. Sometimes information is power or powerful to change a narrative. So all we can do is just do our best with what resources we do have in front of us. And when everything starts to kind of look a little bit better, then we can focus really on the future and how we can take these things that we formerly did and how we can almost, I would say, upgrade it,
Yeah. Yeah, it's time for an upgrade. That's a good way
Right.
to put it. That's a great spin on it. Thank you so
Yeah,
much. We've really
absolutely.
enjoyed being able to visit with you and to listen to your stories and to listen to you speak as an artist and an artist who is an influencer.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for your example and just for being such a source of inspiration for people really around the world. And so it's my honor to be able to introduce you to the students and the staff of Lebanon High School. So
Thank
thank you
you.
for being here with us, and we hope that the next time we'll be in person.
Yes, I hope so too. Because I am I like the Zoom stuff is cool, but I'm just like, okay, just let me break out and
Right.
get out
I
of
hope
my
we can
city.
keep doing Zoom, but I also would like to get back to traveling and seeing people in person. So
Right.
maybe we'll see each other in Tulsa again or Chicago
Yes.
or somewhere.
I
Yeah,
hope so. I hope so because I really miss it. I miss it out there.
yeah, me too. All right.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank
everybody
you.
for coming. Thank you, Eric, for helping to moderate. Before we leave, one more time for students who are here and quiet. Do you all want to say anything or ask Latoya anything before we sign off for the day? Y'all just quiet. They're there, but they're quiet.
No worries, no pressure.
Jasmine's muted because I Jasmine, when we're in class, you're not quiet. Just
Aw.
making sure. Just making sure you're not
Just
quiet.
like, why you just called me out? Like,
I
Well,
say it
thank
with
you for
love.
coming out and telling us your story and life and everything. It was neat.
thank
Thank you
you.
for coming. Is your name LaDeja?
Yes, it is.
And you must
I
be
love it.
Jasmine's sister?
Yeah, I am.
Well, what a nice way to meet you. Does that mean you're going to take art class at the high school?
Yeah.
All right. Hey, selling the program. All right. Thanks so much for coming. And
Thank
thank you, Latoya, for being here with us.
Thank you.
All
All
Take care.
right.
right, guys.
See
Have
you
a good
soon.
one.
Bye.
Bye.